She walked into one of the most famous department stores in the world carrying jars of face cream and a refusal to accept no. It was 1948, and Saks Fifth Avenue was the kind of place where doormen wore white gloves and the beauty floor was controlled by names that already carried wealth, history, and European glamour. Estée Lauder had none of those advantages. She was the daughter of Jewish immigrants from Corona, Queens, married to a man who helped manufacture her products, and trying to sell 4 creams created without national advertising, celebrity endorsements, or a fashionable Paris address. The buyers had already rejected her. Prestige beauty belonged to Helena Rubinstein and Elizabeth Arden, 2 formidable women who had spent decades building their own empires and had no reason to make room for another competitor. But Estée had discovered something the industry's gatekeepers had overlooked. An advertisement could promise transformation, she could place it directly onto a woman's face. She demonstrated her products in salons, beach clubs, and private gatherings until the customers Saks wanted most began asking for the woman its buyers had rejected, and the store was forced to reconsider. From those 4 creams would come Youth Dew, Clinique, La Mer, M times A times C, billions of dollars in annual sales, and a company that remains under the influence of her descendants. Yet the empire Estée created through the intimacy of her own hands would eventually confront a question no formula could answer: could her family inherit the trust that she had spent a lifetime earning? Before the gold-capped bottles, Fifth Avenue counters, and global fortune, however, there was a crowded hardware store in Corona, Queens, where 3 members of an immigrant family would unknowingly give Estée everything she needed to challenge the beauty world. Corona, Queens, in the early 20th century was a neighborhood built by immigrants who had crossed oceans carrying old-world skills and practical American hopes. Estée's father, Max Menzer, came from Central Europe, her mother, Rose Schatz Rosenthal, came from Hungary. Together they raised a large family and a home where every child understood that security came from work. Max operated a hardware store stocked with nails, tools, timber, and plumbing supplies, and when Estée was old enough to help behind the counter, she began studying him. The merchandise interested her very little. His customers did. Max listened before he spoke, remembered what people needed, and treated the person buying a few nails with the same respect he gave someone placing a large order. Estée did not yet know that she was learning how loyalty was created. She only saw that people returned to a store where they felt remembered. At home, her mother gave her a different education. Rose maintained the habits of a European woman who regarded personal appearance not as foolish vanity but as dignity. Estée brushed her mother's long hair, helped apply creams to her face, and watched the change that followed. The face in the mirror was not radically different, but the woman looking into it seemed more composed and certain of herself. Estée dreamed of becoming an actress, flowers, handsome men, and her name glowing above a theater, but what fascinated her most was the small transformation that could occur when a woman believed she looked beautiful. Then her maternal uncle, John Schatz, came into her life with the knowledge that could turn that fascination into work. John was a chemist who operated New Way laboratories and produced creams, lotions, rouges, and fragrances. Around his pots, burners, and formulas, Estée found something more compelling than the shelves of her father's store. Her uncle showed her why certain oils softened the skin, how emulsifiers held a cream together, why one preparation absorbed cleanly while another left an unpleasant residue, and why the method of application could affect how a product performed. He taught her facial massage, cleansing, and the importance of names that made a promise before a jar was opened: super rich all-purpose crème and Dr. Schatz's Viennese cream. Estée learned the formulas, but she did not sell them as a chemist would. When she showed a cream to a woman, she opened the jar, applied it herself, and demonstrated exactly how it should be massaged into the skin. The customer did not have to imagine the result, she could feel it. Estée began carrying the products wherever an opportunity might appear, and one appeared while she was sitting in a salon chair at the House of Ash Blondes. The owner, Florence Morris, noticed Estée's carefully tended skin and asked what she used. Estée could have answered with the name of a cream. Instead, she returned to the salon carrying 4 of her uncle's products and began demonstrating them on the women beneath the hair dryers. Morris watched customers respond and offered her counter space. It was small, almost insignificant, but Estée understood what a foothold could become. One salon led to another, then to beauty parlors, beach clubs, resorts, and private introductions. During those years, she met Joseph Lauder, a quiet, practical businessman who recognized that her collection of creams was becoming something larger. He would give her ambition structure, but Estée would not understand his full value until she had walked away from him. Estée married Joseph Lauder on January 15, 1930, before either of them could have known how completely their marriage and her ambition would become connected. Joseph's family name was later changed to Lauder, and Estée reshaped her own first name into the elegant form that would eventually appear on millions of bottles. Their son Leonard was born in March 1933. While Joseph worked to support the household, Estée continued carrying creams into salons, beach clubs, and resorts, returning home with new customers and larger plans. Joseph did not ask her to reduce those plans to fit the expectations placed on a wife and mother. He believed in the products, accepted that the business would consume their time, and supplied the practical steadiness Estée's restless energy required. Yet in 1939, she left him. Estée later explained that she had married young and convinced herself that she had missed something, that another life might be waiting beyond the one she had already built. They divorced, and she moved to Florida for a time, taking her creams and salesmanship with her. She continued demonstrating products, but distance exposed what she had failed to understand while Joseph was beside her. He had not merely been her husband. He was the person willing to carry the unglamorous weight of an enterprise that still had no security, production, money, schedules, and the daily problems that ambition alone could not solve. Estée would later call the divorce one of the great mistakes of her life and describe Joseph as the sweetest husband in the world. For a woman who rarely looked backward in public, the admission was unusually direct. She could read a stranger's face, sense what a customer wanted, and persuade women to trust a product they had never heard of, yet she had misjudged the value of the man closest to her. In 1942, after 3 years apart, Estée and Joseph remarried. Their second son, Ronald, was born in 1944, and the reunited couple began turning her scattered salon business into a real company. Joseph took responsibility for manufacturing and finances. Estée refined the products, developed their presentation, trained saleswomen, and continued doing what no advertisement could yet do for her, placing the creams directly onto women's skin. In 1946, they formally established Estée Lauder Cosmetics. The company operated from 501 Madison Avenue with only 4 skincare products, while production took place in the kitchen of a former restaurant. At night, creams were mixed in large containers. During the day, Estée carried the finished jars into rooms where almost no one knew her name. There was no vast laboratory, no famous designer, and no national advertising campaign waiting to introduce her. What she and Joseph possessed was a division of labor forged by loss. She created demand, and he made it possible to fulfill. But the prestige beauty industry was guarded by 2 women who had already endured their own battles to reach the top. Helena Rubinstein had built salons across Melbourne, London, Paris, and New York. Elizabeth Arden's Red Door on Fifth Avenue had become a destination for America's wealthiest women. Their brands carried history, status, and the European refinement department store buyers expected. Estée's line came from Queens and arrived without any of those protections. When she approached Saks Fifth Avenue, the buyers saw 4 unknown creams from a company with no national following and turned her away. For most small businesses, that decision would have ended the attempt. Estée did not return with a larger advertising budget or a famous endorsement. In 1947, she carried her products into a Manhattan charity luncheon, opened her bag in the middle of the gathering, and prepared to make the women at the table do what Saks had refused to do, ask for Estée Lauder by name. At the 1947 charity luncheon, Estée did not wait for permission to turn the table into a demonstration counter. She opened her bag, removed the products, and began applying them to the women seated around her. The setting mattered. These were precisely the customers Saks wanted, women with money, social connections, and friends who listened when they recommended something. Estée allowed them to feel the creams, observe the results, and remember the name printed on the jars. The conversations continued after the luncheon ended. Women told other women, and customers began telephoning Saks Fifth Avenue to ask why Estée Lauder products were missing from its beauty floor. The buyers who had rejected one unknown entrepreneur were now hearing demand from the people whose opinions determined what belonged inside the store. In 1948, Saks reportedly placed an initial order worth $800. Within 2 days, the products were gone. Estée had not broken through by imitating Rubinstein or Arden, and she had not waited until she could afford a national advertising campaign. She had created customers before she had secured the counter, forcing the retailer to respond to a market she had assembled herself. Getting into Saks, however, was only the first victory. A counter inside a prestigious store could disappear as quickly as it appeared if the products did not keep moving. Estée worked the floor herself, approached shoppers, demonstrated the creams, and trained saleswomen to explain application instead of simply pointing toward a jar. Then she used a tactic that contradicted the conventions of luxury retail. She gave customers samples. Accountants could see only the product leaving without payment. Estée saw what happened after it entered a woman's home. A sample placed the cream beside her mirror, allowed her to use it without a salesperson watching, and gave the product time to become part of her routine. If she liked it, she returned to buy the full-size jar. Estée expanded the idea into the gift with purchase, offering an additional product when a customer bought something else. The practice would become a defining feature of department store cosmetics, copied so widely that later generations of shoppers would assume it had always existed. But its power came from a simple business calculation: instead of spending every available dollar telling women what a product might do, let them experience it. The Saks counter began attracting customers, orders increased, and other stores could no longer treat Estée Lauder as a small Queens operation that had slipped through one prestigious door. Yet skin creams alone would not provide the explosive growth required to carry the company around the world. Estée needed a product that could reach millions of women without requiring her hands on every face. She found the opportunity by examining one of beauty's oldest customs. In the early 1950s, fine fragrance was expensive, used sparingly, and often received from a husband or admirer on a birthday or anniversary. A woman might desire perfume, but tradition encouraged her to wait for a man to choose it and present it to her. Estée's answer arrived in 1953 inside a brown bottle called Youth Dew. She did not introduce it as another precious perfume. She called it bath oil, and that single decision was about to transform the company. Because Youth Dew was sold as bath oil, a woman could purchase it for herself without waiting for a birthday, anniversary, or a man's approval. She could pour it into the bath, smooth it onto her skin, and carry its warm, spicy scent through an ordinary day. The bottle cost far less than many imported French perfumes, and women used it more generously than a fragrance reserved for special evenings. Estée had turned perfume from something a man bestowed into something a woman chose. The response transformed the company. Youth Dew generated the money required to expand production, enter more department stores, and pursue the international market Estée had always imagined. It also proved that she could create demand on a national scale without personally demonstrating every bottle. Her next challenge was Europe, where the great perfume houses had spent generations teaching the world that authentic luxury spoke French. In 1960, Estée Lauder secured an account at Harrods in London, one of the most prestigious department stores in the world. The symbolism was difficult to miss. A company created by an immigrant's daughter in Queens had entered the European market without disguising itself as something older or more aristocratic. In 1961 came Hong Kong, followed by expansion into Canada, Germany, the Netherlands, and other markets. Gold-capped bottles that had once been filled near a restaurant kitchen were now crossing oceans. But Estée and Joseph understood that one extraordinary fragrance could become a dangerous dependency. In 1964, the company introduced Aramis, a prestige men's fragrance and grooming line at a time when the category was still developing inside American department stores. 4 years later, it launched Clinique, created with dermatologist guidance and presented through a sharply different identity: clean counters, white coats, allergy-tested products, and a structured 3-step skin care routine. Clinique did not depend on Estée's name or the romantic language surrounding Youth Dew. It offered customers the authority of science and became a global business in its own right. By then, the small family operation was turning into a collection of distinct brands, and the person helping build the machinery behind that expansion was Estée's eldest son. Leonard Lauder had grown up close enough to the business to remember its fragile beginning. After serving in the United States Navy, he joined the company full-time in 1958 and worked on the laboratories, international operations, advertising, and systems required to support growth. Estée could persuade a buyer, charm a room, test a fragrance, and sense when women were ready to abandon an old habit. Leonard's ability was different. He could take an instinct that worked at one counter and build the organization needed to repeat it across thousands. The difference became increasingly important as the company grew beyond anything Estée and Joseph could supervise personally. Leonard became president in 1972, marking the beginning of a transfer that would take years rather than one ceremonial day. Estée remained involved in products, packaging, launches, and the standards maintained at the counters. Her name was still the guarantee behind every jar, and no title could reproduce the authority she carried simply by entering a room. In 1978, France appointed her a Chevalier of the Legion of Honor, a striking reversal for the Queen's entrepreneur once considered too unknown for Saks. Yet recognition did not remove the central danger facing every founder whose personality has become inseparable from a company. Estée had built the business by trusting her own judgment, placing her own hands on customers, and attaching her own name to the result. Now she had to allow other people, including her children, to make decisions that would carry that name after she was gone. Leonard could inherit the presidency. He could not automatically inherit the confidence women placed in his mother. And when the family eventually invited Wall Street into the company, it would have to find a way to accept outside money without surrendering control of the empire Estée and Joseph had built together. Leonard Lauder did not attempt to become a second version of his mother. He turned her instincts into systems, expanded the laboratories and international organization, and prepared the company to operate without Estée standing behind every important counter. The greater transformation came during the 1990s, when the family began acquiring brands that already possessed devoted customers and identities of their own. The company invested in M×C beginning in 1994, then added Bobbi Brown Cosmetics and La Mer in 1995, Aveda in 1997, and Jo Malone London in 1999. Each acquisition widened the empire, but it also presented a risk. A corporation could purchase a trademark and still destroy the personality that had made the brand valuable. Leonard's strategy was to provide global distribution and resources while allowing the acquired names to remain recognizable to the people who loved them. In November 1995, the Estée Lauder companies entered the New York Stock Exchange at a valuation of roughly $2 billion. The family accepted Wall Street's capital without giving Wall Street equal power. A dual-class share structure preserved overwhelming voting control for Lauder family interests, ensuring that Estée and Joseph's descendants could continue determining the company's direction even after outside investors purchased shares. That structure protected the family legacy, but it also attached the family permanently to the results. They could not claim control when the company succeeded and distanced themselves when it struggled. Meanwhile, another member of the family was extending the meaning of the company's relationship with women. In 1992, Leonard's wife, Evelyn Lauder, worked with Self magazine editor Alexandra Penny to develop the pink ribbon as a symbol of breast cancer awareness and launched the company's breast cancer campaign. At a time when many women still discuss the disease quietly, ribbons were distributed at Estée Lauder counters, places built to sell creams and lipstick now opening conversations about a diagnosis people were often afraid to name. Evelyn founded the Breast Cancer Research Foundation in 1993, turning awareness into sustained support for medical research. By 2026, the company reported that its campaign and charitable foundation had funded more than $156 million for research, education, and medical services, including more than $123 million directed to medical research through the foundation. Estée lived long enough to see the family business become both a public corporation and a platform for a cause affecting women far beyond the beauty counter. She died at her Manhattan home on April 24, 2004, at the age of 95. Later that year, Leonard and Ronald accepted the Presidential Medal of Freedom on their mother's behalf. Leonard remained the company's great institutional memory for another 2 decades, advising later generations and watching the business grow into a global portfolio producing billions of dollars in annual sales. His son William served as chief executive and later became executive chairman. Ronald's daughters Erin and Jane built careers connected to the brands and the company's management. Yet by the beginning of 2025, daily control had passed to a professional executive outside the family. Stéphane de la Faverie became president and chief executive in January, while William remained chair of the board and the Lauders retained substantial voting power. 5 months later, Leonard died at 92. His death came as the company was confronting declining sales, weakness in China and travel retail, restructuring, impairment charges, and pressure to reconnect its major brands with younger consumers. Fiscal 2025 net sales remained enormous at approximately $14.3 billion, but size could no longer conceal the difficulty of the turnaround. For the first time, the family faced a major test without Estée or Leonard, the founder who created demand and the son who converted it into global scale. The descendants still controlled the votes, but the two people who understood how the empire had been built were no longer there to tell them how to save it. In 1946, the future of Estée Lauder could fit inside 4 jars in the kitchen of a former restaurant. 8 decades later, her descendants control a global beauty empire, but the decision that created it has never belonged to the family. It belongs to the next customer who opens a jar and decides whether to return. The Lauders inherited the brands, shares, board seats, and power to shape the company. They did not inherit that customer's loyalty. Estée once said, "I never dreamed about success. I worked for it." Her family now faces the same requirement. If they want to preserve her empire, they must earn again what she once earned, one woman at a time. If you value stories about ambition, family, and the difficult burden of legacy, subscribe to Tilt and Chill. Because wealth can be inherited, but the trust that created it cannot.